In the history of the people of God. Remember when they entered into the promised land, then they went through that long period of judges wherein they'd be faithful for a while, fall away, sent to deliver by means of one of the judges, and then they'd be faithful again for a while, and then they'd fall away, and it's just a repeating cycle. So we wrapped up the book of Judges last week, and there's sort of a famous statement, the very last verse of Judges chapter 21, verse 25. It's mentioned earlier, I think in chapter 17, but this is the way the book of Judges ends. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's a formula for disaster right there. Everybody does what's right in his own eyes. And so we know the history's not finished yet, and they're gonna be wanting a king here before too long. But we have a little interlude tonight. We're going to study the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth is actually placed in a good place. If you're just going to line up the books of the Old Testament, the book of Ruth is in a good place because the very first verse of Ruth says, chapter 1, verse 1, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And so this is a good place for the story of Ruth to be placed because it happens in the time of the judges. And we've been talking about the period of the judges. Book of Ruth, of course, a short little book. It almost reads like a short story or novel, a little love story. It's really interesting, and it's well remembered, and just kind of an encouraging part of the Bible to read, and sort of a feel-good story, if you will. So again, remember that it happens there. Chapter 1, verse 1 is really interesting to set the time frame. It was in the days of the judges. So there was this man from Judah, Bethlehem, Judah. The name of the man, verse 2, was Elimelech. The name of his wife, Naomi. The name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. They came into the country of Moab and continued there. So the reason why they left home was because there was a famine in the land, and they're going someplace where there might be food and sustenance to see themselves through this famine. We're so far removed from that sort of thing. It's kind of amazing to think about. In fact, we're very far removed even from a farming kind of culture. We don't. So it didn't rain last week. Oh, well, it'll probably rain next week. I can go to the store and buy canned goods. I'm not too frustrated about that. Back in these days, if there was an immediate famine in the area where you lived, if there was a drought and the crops are not producing, this is a life-threatening kind of condition. I just think it's amazing when we read these Bible stories how much their lives were so different from ours in the sense that they didn't have the modern conveniences or ease that we have. They had to move. They had to go someplace where they potentially could get some food. And so they leave and go to the land of Moab. Now, the Moabites and the Israelites weren't great. Well, they weren't on great terms anyway. There was always contention between the Israelites and the Moabites, but they go there because there's a chance to survive the famine. Now, while they're there, verse 3, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. She was left with her 2 sons. They took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelt there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died, also both of them, and the woman was left with her 2 sons. The woman was left of her 2 sons and her husbands. So Naomi's left a widow. She's got these 2 daughter-in-laws, but even her 2 sons are dead now. Again, if you think about a situation like that in those days, women without male support are in difficult circumstances. So she's lost her husband. Not only has she lost her husband, she's lost her 2 sons. So this puts her at a pretty terrible condition without a man to serve as a support basis. Wade.
So it seems like it's worse because if I'm not mistaken, the way the law read, they weren't supposed to take women from Moab.
Right.
They were supposed to take women from their own tribe, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there was rules against Israelites marrying other nations, which was that rule obviously wasn't followed here, but that was certainly a rule for sure. All right, so she decides she's going to go back home. Verse 6, she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. They said to her, Surely we will return with thee to thy people. Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way. For I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave to her. And she, Naomi, said, Thy sister-in-law is gone back to her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. But here's the probably the most famous quote from the book of Ruth. In verse 16, chapter 1:16, Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, nor to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go. Whither thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, thy God, my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. I don't know how many of you might recognize those verses. I'm pretty sure Wayne would recognize. Those verses are often used in wedding ceremonies. Wayne, have you ever heard those verses quoted in a wedding ceremony? It's a beautiful expression of commitment between 2 people. But I've always thought it was a little bit weird because this was between 2 women, not between a husband and wife. This was what Ruth said to Naomi. So I think it's a little bit unusual for that to be quoted in a wedding ceremony. It often has. I haven't heard that in years, but I know years ago you almost always heard that in a wedding ceremony. But as I say, it's a really beautiful expression of commitment, personal commitment that Ruth states to her mother-in-law. So, any thoughts or comments here? So again, it's just a straightforward story, isn't it? There's not any ciphering that's needed really to speak of. Verse 18 says that when she, Naomi, saw that she, Ruth, was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. And so they go back. But again, remember, they're in pretty bad shape. It's not just that Naomi is a widow. Ruth is a widow too. So 2 widows living together. They have no male support. They have no way of really sustaining themselves when they get back to Judah. So we get into chapter 2. In chapter 2, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said to her, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field of the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. I like the way the King James worded that. Her hap was. She happily found, or it happened that she found, that she was gleaning in the field of a relative of her now dead father-in-law. And so I thought we might just remember this this rule about gleaning that existed under the law of Moses. In fact, we just recently read this in our daily Bible readings. If you go to Leviticus 19, in Leviticus 19, verse 9, it says, when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest, and thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God. So there was a provision that, so to glean a field is you go and you gather up every scrap, every sign of the grain or whatever's growing there, you gather it up completely. And the rule was for the landowners that they should not do that. So in a normal harvesting process, some of the grain is going to be dropped and left behind. And so the rule was don't go back and gather that up. And when you get to the corners of the field, when you get to the end rows, don't be real meticulous about getting every last bit out of the field. Leave a little. And this will be a way that the poor can be provided for. I think it's interesting that the poor were still expected to go out and do some work to get what they needed. They'd have to go out and do the gleaning. They'd have to go out and do the gathering of what was left in the field. But there's a provision, a stated provision in the law of Moses that would be the case, that they would leave that. It is significant, as you know how this story unfolds, it's significant that it was her hap. I like the way the King James said it was her hap. It was just happily the case. It just happened to be so that she ended up in the field of this family relative who himself was a rich man. He was a rich man. We talk a lot of times about providence, about how God's providence is at work in the lives of his people. We believe that's true in our lives too. We believe that God's providence still is active in our lives. Now, the nature of providence is that you can't prove it. Could you prove in this story that God's hand was directing Ruth to be in Boaz's field? Oh, you can prove that. There's no way you could prove that. But it sure seems like the case, doesn't it? It sure seems like, as the story unfolds, it sure seems like God was guiding this process. Now, nothing miraculous, right? Providence is not miraculous. God didn't speak to Naomi or Ruth and say, all right, go out. When you get to the fork in the road, go to the left, go to the big tree on the right, and back down that lane, you'll find the field of Boaz. You go there. There was not a direct revelation. There was not a miraculous expression of God's will here. Providence is just natural occurrences happening that produce a beneficial result. And so that's what the story of Ruth seems to be a story of God's providence at work in her case. I think if we went around the room tonight, we'd find a lot of us would be able to probably tell things that happened in our lives that were very good, great blessings that came to us. Not miraculous. God doesn't work miraculous ways anymore. But something really good happened. Or maybe even something we've been praying about came to pass. Again, not in a miraculous way, but it sure seemed like it sure fits together very well. And those are the kind of things that we would ascribe to God's providence. Now, the very nature of providence is you couldn't prove that if your life depended upon it. I was praying about this and this happened, and it all fit together. It came together in such a wonderful way. I believe it was God's answer to my prayer. I'm talking to an atheist, and I said, I really believe that God heard and answered my prayers in his providence. And the atheist says, I don't believe it. There's nothing to that. Well, I can't convince him. Right? There's no way I could prove that to him. He's not going to accept it. He's going to think it's just a matter of pure chance or coincidence. But we, as people of faith, can can trust and have hope in God's providential care. Thoughts or comments, anybody along those lines? Tom?
Just look at that, basically, sort of like, here you come up, Ruth gives, Naomi gives Ruth, go out and live. Where do you go? You go to the reapers. So she sees the reapers go out, she follows them to go out, and she ends up at this field that happened. Now, Naomi told me that, I've got a relative here, but she didn't know who that was. But it's like, used to have what daily where she'd go, you need somebody to help. You drive down to Walmart and 30 people or Home Depot or something. I need a day or and 30, 4, 5 people down there. You grab them. Find a good one, you keep it.
Yeah.
And you try to hire them on or something. But, so this is sort of what happened here. She went out.
Well, but she wasn't a laborer for Boaz. No, she was just trying to. She's trying to get enough food to sustain her and Ruth. She's looking for daily sustenance here.
Back a little bit further, Naomi was an influence there with her, and evidently talked about God and things with Ruth, because with that statement that she said, "Your God will be my God." She, so there was an example of Naomi that both daughter-in-laws respected, but Ruth even had a more closer relationship. She really put her trust in her mother-in-law and her wisdom.
All right. So, as this story keeps rolling forward, Boaz comes and he checks in on his reapers. Now, as to Tom's point, he had paid harvesters in the field. They were reaping his harvest. So he's a rich man. He doesn't do the work himself. He hires these reapers. And he sees, it so happens that Boaz sees Ruth there. And he says, "Whose damsel is this?" Verse 5. The servant that was set over the reapers answered, said, "It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab." And she said, "I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." So she came and hath continued even from morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. Then said Boaz unto Ruth, "Hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here, fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go into the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn." So it's pretty clear the way this is worded that Boaz was aware of Naomi's return, and that not only Boaz, but even the sort of his head honcho here, the guy who was in charge of the reapers, knew about this Moabitish woman who had returned with Ruth from the land of Moab. So this situation is not like they are unknown. They're known in this community. James?
In a couple of verses following this, we see that good works precede you. And he had actually heard of the good works of Ruth, and that she had done kindness to Naomi. So, they're related, and generally you go live next to your kin, and so it would have been obvious when she came back alone with all of her her husband and sons gone. That would have been devastating news. So it would have been news to the community. But what's interesting is the one that makes news also is the stranger and how well she's treated Naomi, and that's well known too.
Exactly right. Look at that verse that James is referring to there in verse 11. Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath fully been shown me of all thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thy husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. So again, as James is pointing out, this story, this whole business is well known. It's not like, who is that? Well, I never heard of her. No, they're in a community that knew of them. They knew Naomi from the past. They're related, a lot of kinsfolk in this area. But they'd also heard this Moabitish woman, Ruth, has come with her and has been very loyal to her and been very kind to her mother-in-law. And so this was reported. Probably might be stretching to make a point here. And I don't think our communities, our modern day communities, are probably as close-knit as this community would have been. But the fact of the matter is we do develop reputations in our immediate community, and people know us, and they know something about us. And they may know more about us than you realize they know about you. And you've established a reputation to a degree, more or less. But that really is important. And we should reflect upon how our actions among those around us has an effect. Ruth's reputation was good, and she's commended for that by Boaz. So Boaz proceeds to continue to benefit her. He says in verse 14, Boaz said to her, "At mealtime come thou hither, and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar." And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean, even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not." So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went to the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee." And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought. And she said, "The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead." And Naomi said to her, "The man is near kin to us, one of our next kinsmen." So, again, Naomi didn't know this until she came home after that first day. But when Boaz found out who she was, I think you get the idea that he strictly warned those workers, "Don't you come near that woman, and don't you touch her, don't you harm her or approach her in any way. Let her glean. If she gets close to the good harvest, if she gets near to the sheaves, don't rebuke her. And as you're doing your harvesting, on purpose, drop some handfuls in her vicinity where she'll be able to gather them up." And so, at the end of the day, when she came back, she had so much. Naomi was shocked. Naomi was, so this gleaning business, that's pretty commonplace. And so, if you're gleaning, you're probably not going to get a whole lot. You might get enough, to make a meal. But she brought in way more than that. And Naomi is shocked. She had an expectation, but what Ruth brought home far surpassed any expectation that she had. "Where did you go?" And so Ruth related where she'd been and who the man was who owned the field where she gleaned. And Naomi said, "Oh man, God has blessed us. That Boaz is a near kinsman of ours." Now, you know what she's thinking already, right? Near kinsman, and the law of Moses pertaining to near kinsman. And so she's thinking that way already. Ruth goes on to tell her in verse 21, chapter 2:21, Ruth the Moabitess said, "He said to me, thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest." And Naomi said unto Ruth her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field." So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. So this goes on for a little while. We don't know how long. So how long is the harvest? Barley and wheat. But remember, they're harvesting. They're not using modern combines. They're reaping by hand. So that last statement there probably suggests that maybe this went on for potentially several weeks, I would think, before the total harvest was completed. All right, so we get into chapter 3. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee?" So Naomi's worried about Ruth's future here. We're not talking about today or tomorrow. She's talking about long-term well-being for Ruth. "Now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put on thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor. But make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou oughtest to do." And Ruth was compliant. She said unto her, "All that thou sayest unto me I will do." So, again, this is in the context of Naomi wanting to ensure the long-term well-being of Ruth. And it is significant that Boaz is a near kinsman. And there was the rule of near kinsmen that you know well. Go back to Deuteronomy 25. In Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, "If brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel." So we're familiar with that law. And actually, interestingly, that was, so this is the law of Moses time, right? And of course, Jesus lived under the law of Moses. And do you remember an episode in Matthew chapter 22 when the Sadducees thought they would try to entrap Jesus by making reference to this rule where if a man dies, his brother should marry his widow and raise up seed to his name? In Matthew 22, verse 24, the Sadducees said, "Master, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were with us 7 brethren, and the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue, left his wife to his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third, and to the 7th. And last of all the woman died. Therefore in the resurrection whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her." They thought they had Jesus really caught up in a trap here. Well, what a crazy hypothetical case. So if you want to dream up hypothetical cases, I guess you can dream up anything you want. Hey, here's 7 brothers, and they all married the same woman, and they all died before she did. Come on, surely you could come up with a better story than that. But that's the story they posed to Jesus. Of course, Jesus said, that you do err not even knowing the Scripture, and so he completely defeated him on that occasion. But kind of interestingly here, that the understood process suggested in that episode in Matthew 22, the understood process was, so here's a man, he dies. His next immediate relative, his brother, would marry his widow. But they suggested that this kept passing down through 7 brothers. And so I think what that shows is that there was an understanding that there would be a succession, the next nearest kinsman. This would keep filtering down to the next nearest kinsman. In this case, they mentioned 7 brothers, but maybe it's not brothers. But there are other relatives. And so it's very certain that the application of this Levitical rule was that the widow would be taken by the next nearest kinsman to raise up descendants to the dead man, right? And so that's the process that's underway here with Ruth and Boaz. Thoughts here, anybody? Okay. So Cindy and I were talking about this earlier. I'm not I'm not too clear on this business. Cindy warned me not to tread off too deeply into this business of her going in and uncovering Boaz's feet and waiting for his instructions. And so I will take Cindy's counsel to heart. That's the part of this story that I never really fully understood or could explain. But it's clear that what Ruth is doing is that she is making a request of Boaz to fulfill the kinsman's duty. I think we could just leave it at that. Josh, you ready? Go, jump in here, Josh.
I just think she wouldn't have been instructed to go do something indecent or improper. So
Yeah.
I think it's customary, and I don't think there's any wrongdoing here. Naomi wouldn't tell her to go and do something sinful. So I think we can at least say that.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Tate?
Well, I might go a little bit farther. I think that's exactly the truth. I think there was one, she was actually trying to be extra careful not to either embarrass or try to put him in a situation that was uncomfortable too. So that would be away from the public at night. And how do you wake somebody up at night? You get cold feet. I mean, it's a different expression, but you wake them up by doing that and make the request then. I don't think there's anything indecent about what was done. People have tried to make that argument, but I think it's obvious that it's I think just trying to approach the situation in a way that's not going to put him in a bad light. He can say no if he wants to, right? This is at night away from everybody, and nobody will ever know it.
Yeah.
And she can go away, and nobody would.
I do. And I think this is honorable.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you wanted to put an ugly twist on it, well, you could. But I think this is honorable. But basically, I think bottom line, she is petitioning Boaz to fulfill the duty of the near kinsman. That's what's happening here, right? All right. So Boaz is ready to do this. Skip down to verse 10. She said, well, verse 9. He said, "Who art thou?" She answered, "I am Ruth thy handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thy handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman." He said, "Blessed be thou the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am a near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, it shall be in the morning, that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then will I do the part of a kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth, and lie down until the morning." And she lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before one could know another. And he said, "Let it not be known that a woman came into the floor." Also he said, "Bring the veil that thou hast upon thee, and hold it." And when she held it, he measured 6 measures of barley, and laid it on her, and she went into the city. And when she came into her mother-in-law, she said, "Who art thou, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, "These 6 measures of barley gave he me, for he said to me, Go not empty unto thy mother-in-law." Then said she, Naomi, "Sit still, my daughter, until thou knowest how the matter will fall. For the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day." So this is moving pretty fast. This is progressing along pretty fast. Do you get the idea? I don't know. I don't know if I could prove this or not. Do you get the idea that Boaz had given some thought to this near kinsman business? You know, because he already knew before she even made the suggestion to him that I am a near kinsman, but there's one kinsman nearer than me. And so you get the idea that maybe he had given some thought to this. I was wondering if you were going to make a movie of this story, who would you cast in the role of Ruth? I've got an idea that if we were going to cast that as a movie, we'd pick some just really beautiful woman to play the part of Ruth. And then, no doubt, some really rugged, handsome guy to be Boaz, too. But I'm thinking about Ruth in particular, that, you know, you would probably cast her as some just incredibly beautiful woman. And that's not in this story. It never mentions her physical appearance at all. I remember years ago, some of you don't even know who I'm talking about. Some of you remember Larry Raspberry. Larry Raspberry was sitting right up here, and we were talking about Ruth, and I said, you kind of get the idea that she was beautiful, but I said, the fact of the matter is she may have been as ugly as a mud fence. And when I said ugly as a mud fence, Larry nearly fell out of his seat. But she may have, there's no indication that he's attracted to her because she's beautiful. She may have been. We just don't have we have just no idea at all about that. But his intention here is completely honorable and noble. He intends to do the will of God in fulfilling the role of the near kinsman, and he appreciates Naomi and the good person that she is. So it's a beautiful story. Wayne?
I think Naomi knows a lot more about what's going on than the story appears to credit to her. I get the impression she is setting up. She's kind of matchmaking for Ruth and trying to match the two together. And he says, well, we got a problem here. We'll work that out.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out itself.
Naomi's certainly working behind the scenes to bring this all to pass, for sure.
I mean, it's obvious that he likes her. 'Cause, I mean, he's giving her more than what's required. Over and over again, she's getting, so she's at least recognized as a special person. So she's encouraging.
Yeah, exactly right.
And why would you want Boaz? He's an honorable man. I mean, even when he greets his servants, he recognizes the Lord greets you, right? He's a spiritual-minded man.
He's a good, Ruth is a really good person. Boaz is a really good person too. Exactly right. Okay, so
Chapter 4. Boaz went up to the gate, verse 1, and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, and to whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So the gate of the city, that's where you do your business. That's where all these transactions and exchanges take place, right? So Boaz goes there, I think, certainly understanding that this guy will come by here today. And when he does, he calls him over. The guy sits down. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit ye down here. And they sat down. And he said to the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me that I may know. For there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. Now here's the catch though. Then said Boaz, What day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. So Boaz said, This is a nice piece of ground. Naomi's selling it. And you have first option. And the guy's ready. He said, Man, I'll buy that. I'll buy that. And he says, One thing though, there's just one additional consideration. If you buy the land, you also have to marry Ruth because there's the duty of the near kinsman. This makes me wonder if it was not the case that Ruth had proselyted into the Jewish religion, and that she was following the law of Moses, and not as a native-born Israelite, but as one who was converted into the religion of the Israelites. The kinsman said, though, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. What do you think he's saying there? I'm sorry, Wade, I thought you had your hand up.
I was going to ask you about verse 7. It says, when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Do you think he was drunk?
I think you sure have to be reading between the lines to make that conclusion. He's with his reapers. He's had a good harvest. They've had a feast.
He's happy. It's a good day in his life.
Drinking alcohol?
that's one of the most cheerful times of the year. You're bringing in the abundance that God has given you. You
Yeah.
should be cheerful.
Yeah.
I mean, all the other work that you put in all year long leads to this one
But,
event.
yeah, I think you'd sure be having to stretch it.
To say he was drunken, because he actually makes good sense. When Ruth wakes him up, it's not like he's in a stupor. He's fully aware and deals, logically with the circumstance. So I would not say that. Tom?
Has to do with the heart, he had a good heart. He made a good amount of grain for her to carry back to the.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Probably about all she could carry.
So, he's there, he's at the end of, talks about, he'd been out there all day, they harvested, they had a lot of this grain stored up, he's laying there at that, that grain, and, I don't know, I go out and do a good day's work, and I come in and eat dinner, I sit down on the couch, I'm out.
Immediately,
Karen fixes up some sweet tea, and,
you're out.
I'm out.
Yeah.
It's done.
I think that's right. I think that's a good
You're
one.
sort of content because everything went well.
It's been a good day.
You had a good day.
Yeah. All right, real quickly, we're just about out of time, but this story
It's so cool. I just love this story in the Old Testament. So why do you think the near kinsman said, I cannot redeem it lest I mar my own inheritance? Redeem thou my right to thyself. I cannot redeem. Any thoughts on why he thought he might mar his inheritance?
Land that he was purchasing would not be his anymore. It would be the right of the one that was being born from Ruth. That's one, but I think there's some contestability that son would have some of the proceeds from his
That's what I
original
think.
inheritance.
I don't want him to mess up
The inheritance that I have ready to pass down to my seed. I think that's it.
yeah.
Also, in verse 10 there, a little bit later in the chapter, you're passing on the dead man's name, not your own.
Yeah.
So, by having this child, by marrying Ruth and then having children with Ruth, at least the first child would be not your own name.
That's right. That's right. I think that's what he's talking about.
I don't want to mess up my line of inheritance. I think that's what he's saying there. So, verse 7, it was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing, for to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said to the elders and unto all the people, ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren, and from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. And all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thy house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. So, again, Boaz had thought this thing through. And so he goes to where this guy is almost certain to show up. He gets witnesses. He presents the case. It's all out in the open and it's understood. And so he goes through the legitimate process of acquiring the inheritance of Elimelech, and also the right to marry Ruth and to bear children, bear a child at least in the name of the dead husband. So it's a beautiful story. Verse 13, Boaz took Ruth, she was his wife, and when he went in to her, the Lord gave her conception, she bare a son. And the woman said unto Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom, and became nurse unto it. So, then the very last part of the story is the last verses, this lineage, how this lineage lines out. So it mentions several. Going back to Pharez, verse 18. You remember Pharez? Pharez was, remember Tamar and Judah? Judah went into his daughter-in-law because he had not provided a son. She's the one that played the harlot. And he went into her, and this son Pharez was born to Judah. And then it goes on, Pharez and Hezron and blah, 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 down here to Salmon, verse 20. Salmon begat Boaz, Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. And so there's that lineage. So Boaz, Obed, Jesse, and David. Famous linkage there. And of course, that puts Ruth in the lineage of Jesus, right? Because Jesus is a descendant of King David. And so that puts Naomi squarely in the ancestry of Jesus. Neat story. It's really a neat story. Like I said, I think it's a feel-good story here. There's a lot, as we read through the Old Testament, especially as we read the history of the Israelites, it's kind of discouraging. Those people are pretty miserable. They're constantly murmuring and complaining. But right here in the middle of it, there's just sort of a little interlude in the story of Ruth, and it really is a good story. Thanks, everybody. Lord willing, we'll start in 1 Samuel next week.